All right, this last session is about digital currency. Everyone's heard of it. Everyone is either involved in it or knows someone who is, except apparently me. I don't know much about it, but I'm really excited to find out the digital currency landscape. You'll understand the landscape, where the opportunities are, what the regulators are thinking, and how Cuscal is responding to this increasingly important topic. 3 speakers, and then some questions that you guys can ask at the end, finish by 4:30. The second speaker, Steve Vallis, the CEO of Blockchain Australia, former lawyer, former digital strategist, former management consultant. So he's like a super CEO. He's a CEO, lawyer, digital strategist and management consultant. It's like a kind of a, you know, when you get a mixed lollies, he's got all the skills. The final speaker will be Bianca Bates, Cuscal's Chief Client Officer and Deputy CEO. She leads the product, client services and operations teams with enormous experience, worked all over the place, and she will give a Cuscal focus. But the first speaker, Anthony Jones, Head of Innovation and Partnerships, Australia, New Zealand and South Pacific at Visa, focuses on new payment flows and innovative partnerships, including digital-only banks, crypto exchange clients, and leading Visa's strategy on collaborative product design. I was just telling Anthony that I never think about this, but when I had a Visa card, the first time I didn't have to go to the bank. Like when I just finished school, I didn't have to go to the bank on a Friday arvo and get as much cash as I could out. That made my life better. First time I went overseas with my Visa card and someone said to me, I said, I'm just going out to get traveller's checks. And I went, no, you can just take your Visa card. I was like, whoa, this is unreal. And now you just tap everything and it's just so easy to spend money, and you don't have to wait for people to count out your change. So I hadn't really thought about it today, but Visa, it's one of the best things in my life, and it's made my life eventually better. I didn't even know they were the main sponsor. Ladies and gentlemen, to get this ball rolling, please welcome Anthony Jones. My liege.
It was quite an intro and quite an amazing advert for Visa, so I really appreciate that. I was just reflecting on the way here today that it's been over a decade since I was at Luna Park. In fact, I know the exact day. It was the 26th of January 2012. It was the day I received my citizenship to Australia, and it was right here on this stage. So more than 10 years since I've been here in this particular room. Now, the reason I mention that is because they didn't ask me to do a presentation that day. And in fact, they didn't even ask me to do a speech. But if I had, and if I'd mentioned crypto and digital currencies even just 10 years ago, then the room would have been completely silent and nobody would have known anything about what I was talking about. So that is an amazing amount of innovation in just a really short period of time. There are now over 12,000 cryptocurrencies. A lot of them are shit, but there are over 12,000 cryptocurrencies. Some have real value, some don't. But look how that industry has moved and how that technology has evolved in such a short period of time. Now, 10 years ago, we were all using iPhone 4s. It's not like I'm talking about ancient history. It's very, very recent, and how quickly things have moved on. And now, here I am on stage, and I am being asked to give a PowerPoint presentation. So, this is our notice of confidentiality and our disclaimer. It's really famous amongst Visa customers. I'm sure you've seen it before. Read it really quick, because I am not going to spend any time on it. In terms of what we're going to talk about today, though, and the areas that we want to discuss, I thought importantly it would be to kind of reset the level of knowledge. Because what I've found in delivering these presentations is that not everybody understands digital currency, not everybody has the same level of understanding and knowledge. So I want to start by doing that introduction to help make sure that everybody's on the same playing field in terms of the definitions of digital currencies. Secondly, we'll take a look at the Australian consumer perceptions. So what do Australians think about digital currencies? Because to us in the room here today, that's probably the most important thing. Sure, we can take a look at the global view, which is important too, but what do Australian consumers think about digital currencies? Then I want to take a look at adoption by financial institutions, because there are a lot of financial institutions in the room here today. And so what we will focus on is what Visa is seeing from around the globe and what we are seeing and identifying as the trends within our customer base and what are they asking us for. And when I say customers, many of them are financial institutions, some of them are governments, some of them are banks, large central banks, and then also the tech players that work in that space as well, the fintech players. And then finally, in terms of shaping the future of payments, how is it that Visa is even playing a role when it comes to digital currencies? And I'll touch very briefly on the work that we've done with Cuscal as well. So kicking off with that introduction, and like I say, to set the scene so that we're all fully understanding of what it means. First of all, not all digital currencies are created equally. There are three distinct, very different variants of digital currency. In fact, I think of them more as assets than digital currencies in many respects. The first one is cryptocurrencies, or more accurately, crypto assets, because most of them are not made for making payments with. They are more typically a store of value. Now, these are non-sovereign. They're digital currencies operating on a distributed ledger. So what that essentially means is that in many cases they are permissionless, and they are on decentralized networks. So there's not a single organization that is controlling those particular digital assets. Like I said, there's about 12,000 last count. Not all of them are reflected on the exchanges that you might have heard of. So if you go to CoinSpot, they have plenty of digital currencies on there, but I can guarantee they don't have all 12,000, and thank goodness, because like I said, a lot of them probably aren't worth people looking at. However, many of them are. So it's important to take a look at those that have value and those that don't. Now, from a media perspective, we've all seen it. We've all seen the media speculation and interest in digital currencies and digital assets. The biggest, of course, being around Bitcoin, which still accounts for about a third of the total market value of all crypto assets. And then Ethereum, following up and quickly expanding in terms of its value over the last period of time and catching up with Bitcoin in many respects. Now, most of them work on two specific types of consensus mechanism. One is proof of work. The other one is proof of stake. Really quickly, just to give the definition, and because I don't want to go too much into the detail, otherwise we will be here all afternoon, is proof of work essentially is computers trying to solve a really challenging puzzle. Basically guessing at an answer. So you need huge amount of computing power, normally massive graphic cards linked together to form a whole room full of mining computers to guess the answer to a puzzle. How difficult is this puzzle? Well, in the case of blockchain, imagine a 12-mile stretch of sand. And every single grain of sand is a possible answer to that piece of code and to unlock that particular block. The computers are all guessing which grain of sand is actually the one that unlocks the puzzle. So you can imagine how difficult that becomes. Still, every 10 minutes on the blockchain of Bitcoin, somebody is guessing the right answer. Now that means it's incredibly energy inefficient. The amount of power required to guess at that answer is quite overwhelming, and that's why there's been a lot of focus on proof of work mechanism and the impact that it has on the environment, despite the fact that most industrial miners are actually using renewable energy. The alternative to that is proof of stake, which essentially means that you need to hold a certain value or number of a particular currency in which to validate transactions for other people. So the more you own, the more validations that you actually will conduct, and the more validations that you conduct for the good of the whole network, the more reward you receive every time that you do those validations. So the greater the number that you hold and that you are essentially using to validate transactions, the greater you get into a reward. So jumping on then into stablecoins. So stablecoins are then private sector, so again, not sovereign-backed. They are typically on a permissioned network, so not unpermissioned like the previous one. And they are, again, decentralized networks. Typically, they are backed by cash or cash equivalents in treasury. So what that means is that in the case of USDC, so USD stablecoin, every time they issue one of those tokens, there is an equivalent US dollar sitting in their treasury reserves that backs it up. There is a different type of stablecoin, though, And these are the ones that have probably had a lot more focus from the media over the last few weeks, and that's with regards to algorithmically, I can't even say it, that's how challenging it is, algorithmically balanced to a selected currency. So they essentially use digital assets to balance the value of their synthetic currency to that of, say, the US dollar or the euro. What could possibly go wrong when you're trying to balance a real currency against a digital currency that has very different levels of volatility? Stablecoins, however, have become incredibly useful. Why is that? Well, unlike Visa or SWIFT, every time you make a transaction with a Visa card, you get an instant notification, and so does the merchant, that the transaction is going through. It's a message. So you have an instant gratification, instant knowledge that the transaction is going through, but the funds, they're moved 24 to 48 hours later between the banks in the background that represent the issuer of the card and the acquirer. Similar with SWIFT, you get a message first, the funds are moved 2, 3, 4 days later. With a stablecoin, the moment the stablecoin moves from one person's wallet to the other, you've transferred not only the message, but the real value of that stablecoin as well. So just to think about that, straight away, the recipient of the funds have those funds in their account, and they can then on-spend that elsewhere. So the power of stablecoins is really quite immense. As a result, it's not just the preserve of tech companies like USDC with Circle, or Tether, or Diem with Facebook, which has now departed us, but also you've got JP Morgan that have issued its own US dollar token, which is linked to the US dollar and is available for JP Morgan customers to transfer value between one business and another. So it's also mainstream financial institutions that are really focusing on the benefits and value of stablecoin. Similarly, we then have central bank digital currency. So a central bank digital currency acts and feels a little bit like a stablecoin. It's pegged to a real currency. The reason it's pegged to real currency is because it's issued by that country's central bank. So you now have a digital token of your fiat currency. So digital fiat, if you want to look at it another way. So with digital fiat, there are two distinct variants. You have a retail version, and that's what we've seen in China and in Nigeria with the e-yuan and the e-naira, which is essentially issued from the Central Bank of China through its partners, which mainly includes banks and large digital partnerships like Alipay, for instance, and they distribute those funds through to the individual, and the individual has a wallet that they can tap against somebody else's phone, or they can tap at the merchant. Very similar experience to what we have with our Visa cards when they're on Apple Pay or on Google Wallet. But instead of just being the message, it is, of course, that real transfer of value. Now, there is a little bit of a dark side with central bank digital currencies, and I think it's fair to kind of call them out, which is it is programmable money, and as a result of being programmable money, depending on the level of knowledge and information that a government holds and a central bank can hold about the individual, is that they can get very specific on the levers that are pulled around that programmability. So to give you an idea, we've had significant payments that have been made during COVID to individuals to sustain them and to help the economy. Now imagine if those payments were made and you had to spend them within 30 days. You could actually have a timer on a central bank digital currency so that it disappeared if it was not spent during that initial period of time. To take it a step further forward, based on your gender, based on your race, your religion, your ethnicity, you could distribute different levels of stimulus depending on the population that you're sending it to, even by age groups, for instance. And it means that you could get really, really specific with fiscal policy. So governments and central banks could then start to tax at different levels as well. So there's some real benefits of using central bank digital currencies, that flow through of real value that really, really quickly in a real instant environment, but then also you've got that controllability. I spent a lot of time on this slide, but I think it's really important to set the scene. Not all digital currencies are created equally. There are 3 distinct variants, as you see on the slide there. So Australia. This slide is to remind me that there is, of course, an elephant in the room, which is we've seen some real turmoil in the last 3, 4, 5 months in relation to digital currencies and digital assets. And that really started when not only did we see inflation within our normal markets and with our traditional markets, and also depression of the NASDAQ, the FTSE, the New York Stock Exchange, and of course the ASX as we saw shares drop, but we saw that replicated within the digital currency markets as well. Now, we always thought that they were uncoupled. We always thought that digital currencies are decoupled from mainstream economics, but that wasn't the case, because to be quite honest, we all operate with the same dollars in our pockets. And if you don't feel as wealthy, you're not going to invest. And if your other investments are dropping in value, people do tend to start to liquidate them. And that applies to stocks, it applies to shares, it applies to gold, and it applies to cryptocurrency. So despite what a lot of people thought and speculated, what happened over the last few months is that we saw a sell-off in crypto in the same way that we sell off in the traditional markets as well. We also saw some really high-profile failings. I mentioned those algorithmically based stablecoins. Well, Terra Luna was one of those, and Terra Luna was too complicated by half, to be quite honest. They'd already accumulated somewhere in the region of $6 or $7 billion worth of Bitcoin as their reserve for their US dollar stablecoin. And so when the market started to drop, they started to sell. So they were selling at a very vicious rate. So straight away, you're starting to see those selling patterns come through as the market started to sell off Bitcoin. And as Bitcoin went down, then all of the other cryptos started to follow it. As a result, we saw some failings. We saw Celsius and we saw Voyager out of Canada, all struggling to maintain the value of the accounts of their customers. And as a result, it was essentially a bank run. They've started to put up the gates and say, no, you can't take out your deposits anymore. You can't liquidate the holdings that you have. So what was the crypto industry, which is very new and different, was actually really similar to what we've all seen before with bank runs. For those of you from the UK, we saw this with Northern Rock Building Society some years ago as well, right? So this is that same thing where you get a bank run and the bank has to close its doors. The reason I mention this is because our consumer research was conducted before this happened. So please take some of these with a little bit of a grain of salt. The other thing I would call out is that we see this as an accumulation period. So when the market is down like this in crypto land, essentially a crypto winter, as I'm sure Steve referred to it later on, actually. This crypto winter we see as an accumulation phase. So from a Visa perspective, well, we're kind of indifferent to the value of Bitcoin going up and down, to be quite frank. But what we think is that when it comes to crypto, this is a period of which we see technology being built. And with crypto, we've seen this time and time again, this cycle of build, then the price accelerates, then it crashes, then they build, then it goes up, then it crashes. So I'm not saying that will happen again, but that is kind of the pattern that we've got used to when it comes to the crypto markets. Back to the research. So we decided to have a better understanding of Australian consumers, and we broke them into 5 specific groups. We wanted to find which part of the consumers are unengaged, those that are skeptics, those that are curious, those that are owners, and those that are active users of cryptocurrency. So what we did is we interviewed almost 800 Australians. This was in September, October of last year. 93% of them were aware of cryptocurrencies. Now, I said at the beginning, when the first time I was on this stage getting my citizenship, nobody in the room would have known what a cryptocurrency is, maybe 1 out of 200 people. Now, 93% of people know what a cryptocurrency is. And then when we break that down, what we saw was that just under half were unengaged. They weren't negative, they weren't positive, they were just kind of, nah, whatever. Then you've got 11% who are skeptics. Again, this number is significantly lower than we'd seen previously. So these are the ones that are anti-crypto, really think that it's just fool's gold. Then you've got 15% that were regarded as curious. So they hadn't bought crypto, but they were kind of interested in it, and they were keen to learn a little bit more. 9% were owners, 18% were active users. So on a monthly basis, they were actively trading and moving funds around, moving funds from one individual to another. So that's 27% of the respondents, over a quarter, were saying that they either held or had held a cryptocurrency at some point. When we broke that down in terms of what are the real benefits for our clients, our customers, banks, building societies, credit unions, fintechs who want to issue a card. Why would they want to do that? What's the relevance of crypto to having a Visa card? Well, what we heard is that a very, very high percentage of them were either very or somewhat interested in being paid rewards in the form of crypto. So I don't know how many of you have taken many flights in the last 2.5 years. Probably not many. Maybe you've just started again now. But what we noticed as an organization is that maybe frequent flyer points were a bit on the nose. You know, during COVID, Velocity and Qantas, there was actually a period of time where you couldn't redeem your rewards for a period. So people started to lose interest. They couldn't travel anymore. They couldn't redeem some of those rewards. So they were looking for alternative reward mechanisms and loyalty mechanisms. Really interesting that this report kind of called out the fact that crypto has the opportunity to fill that gap and become the new reward mechanism. Not for every consumer, of course, but for a very large percentage of them, particularly those that were curious, owners or users. The next one was that a very high percentage of the respondents were super keen on having a card linked to their crypto holdings. So the ability to have your crypto funds, so maybe you'd have a wallet with Bitcoin, Solana, maybe another wallet with Ethereum, Polkadot, and then be able to link a Visa card to it so that you could tap your card at a counter. Maybe you're going into Woolies, you've done your groceries, you bring out your phone, you choose your Visa card, and you tap it. And what it's doing is that it's still sending the merchant a message that is related to fiat, because Visa only allows fiat currencies to transact on VisaNet. But in the background, what it's doing is that it's selling the individual's holdings of a crypto, let's call it Bitcoin, and converting it into the equivalent cash at point of sale. So the merchant gets fiat. The user is tapping with a card that is using fiat. But in the background, it's automatically selling off those crypto reserves, or it's putting a message to sell them the next day or in the next few hours, so that the consumer is then being able to draw down on the funds that they've accumulated. So how is Visa supporting its clients with digital assets, and what are we seeing globally from a digital currency perspective? Well, in August of last year, we purchased CryptoPunk 7610. She cost us 49.5 ETH, which at the time was $150,000. Her pronouns are she, by the way, just in case anybody picked up on that. Her pronouns are she. I'm very, very much told that that is the case. So $150,000. Within 6 months, she was worth about 1.3 million, and I think now she's worth about half. But we didn't invest in her because we wanted to make money. That's not the way that Visa works. It doesn't really keep our shareholders very happy with us just going out and buying non-fungible tokens like CryptoPunk 7610. But what it did demonstrate is that how important we think NFTs and non-fungible tokens are as a new consumer asset class. This is a new class of items that consumers want to purchase. Let me take that a further step further forward. And because a lot of you probably think of NFTs as just being about digital artwork. Well, it kind of is. You know, the ability to be able to buy a JPEG or a music file or a movie file and have a limited version of it. Because until now, all digital assets were infinite. I could download a copy of The Godfather, and so could everybody else in this room, and we would never run out of copies of The Godfather from the Apple Store. Infinite digital assets. An NFT makes them finite. They're linked to the blockchain. They're each unique. So if you only want to create one of Beeple's first 5,000 days, that very confusing mosaic that you see up there on the left, you can create just one asset. Really powerful. Kings of Leon launched their album, their latest album, on an NFT. So I think it was 2,500 copies, limited edition. So a little bit like the old days of vinyl, where you create a physical object. It's almost making an intangible digital asset physical again in many respects, because you can buy and sell and trade it. Those albums have now appreciated in value. You got special editions with their album that came via an NFT. You got ticket allocations when they were touring in your city. You got artwork that you didn't get if you were just to go out and listen to it on Spotify. So this was another way with the creators being able to work directly with the consumer. And then you've got Bored Ape. Bored Ape is quite fascinating because they see this as almost like digital Disneyland. By buying a Bored Ape, you have then the intellectual property to that specific ape. If you want to set up a cafe or a website or a technology company and name it after that Bored Ape and use that as your logo, you can because you own it. You own the rights to it. So a very, very different kind of way of looking at the way that we've always looked at digital art up until this point. The metaverse, I think you've had quite a lot of discussion today around the metaverse and how, by having game avatars and, maybe armor or guns that you can give your avatar and you can buy them using NFTs. Again, the ability to buy and sell and trade because you have a finite object, its ownership is linked onto the blockchain, everybody knows who owns it at one particular time, and you can transfer it in the future, maybe at a loss, maybe at a profit. And then finally, you've got authentication of real-world assets. Again, from Visa's perspective, we see this as really, really interesting because one of the biggest challenges that high luxury brands have is counterfeit goods. So that's why Breitling and that's why Louis Vuitton have now started to link their physical assets, their physical goods that you can buy online, with an NFT, so that when you buy it, you can have certainty that what you're buying is the real thing. Because inside the handbag or on the back of the watch, there is etched a number which is completely transposed onto the NFT itself. The NFT has an image of the item that you've bought, your handbag. It has the full documentation, and when you sell the handbag, you sell the NFT with it. Without the NFT, the handbag is worthless. Really, really useful. The last one there is the Alfa Romeo Tonale. So the Alfa Romeo Tonale is the first blockchain-listed vehicle because the logbook is on a blockchain. It is an NFT. So every time you go and you pick up your car, you also get an NFT with your Alfa Romeo. And then when you go and get it serviced, the service book is updated on the NFT. The ownership of the vehicle, its service history, everything that's ever gone wrong with it is now on the blockchain. So that's why we think that NFTs are more than just digital artwork and overpriced pieces of art that have probably devalued quite significantly in the last 3 or 4 months. There's a real-world application to a lot of these things. And digital assets are important to all of us. It's not just for the kids, because we all watch digital movies and listen to digital music. The ability to have a finite number of them again starts to become really powerful. So the areas for Visa and the areas that we are working with our clients on really break down into 3 distinct areas. First of all, we've got digital currency products and partnerships. So we're working with crypto exchanges. So we're actively prospecting with the likes of CoinSpot. I saw him on the stage earlier. Where is he? Oh, there he is. So actively working with digital currency exchanges. Over 65 of them have now issued a Visa card connected to those funds that they have for the consumer. So you can connect your Bitcoin wallet to a Visa card so you can spend almost directly every time that you tap from the stored value of funds that you have. We're also seeing new digital currency flows. So I mentioned stablecoins before, how really powerful that can be for small businesses to transfer not only a message, but a value between 2 businesses. One might be based in Sydney, the other one might be in Nova Scotia. It really makes no difference. The ability to transfer funds in real time becomes really powerful and really important. We've also seen digital currency settlement with Visa. So using USDC stablecoin with Circle, the ability for some of our crypto exchange partners to not only be able to buy and sell their crypto assets within their exchange, but what we found is that they didn't hold a lot of fiat currency. So when it came to the daily settlement with Visa of US dollar in fiat, they actually said this is actually a bit difficult for us because we don't hold a lot of US dollars. What we do have is a lot of stablecoin. Can we settle with you in stablecoin instead? And we've said, yes, we can definitely do that. So with our partnership with Anchorage, we're now building out those capabilities so that crypto exchanges can settle with us 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, in real time, using USDC. We're also developing custodial services. So the ability to hold a curated list of maybe the top 4 or 5 cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum, so that we can provide services to our banking customers like Cuscal. And then the other way is through those Visa crypto APIs. So linking your card tap and the value of the transaction back to perhaps a reward mechanism, so that the individual is being rewarded in ETH or Bitcoin instead of frequent flyer points from Qantas or Hilton points, for instance. We also have our digital currency innovation lab, and the focus there is on working with our clients to develop new solutions that involve digital assets and digital currencies. I'm almost at the end of the presentation, so I'm going to speed up a little bit on here. The other really important part, though, and my friends from Visa Consulting and Analytics are here today, and that's with regards to research and thought leadership. So sessions like this, hopefully it's been educational in some areas. You know, maybe we've covered some stuff that you've not heard of before, but the most important thing that our Visa Crypto Advisory Service does, that's quite a mouthful, isn't it? Visa Crypto Advisory Service. We work with our clients to develop how they are going to lean into digital currencies and digital assets. As I said at the beginning, it might seem like we're in the crypto winter at the moment and it's not front of mind, but this is when stuff gets done. This is when the stuff gets built, so that when the market picks up again and consumer interest comes back, that you're ready for that next wave. So now is the time to accumulate during that period. So in summary, I've mentioned what our crypto advisory service does, and we've worked really closely with Cuscal. I'm not going to steal Bianca's thunder because she's going to talk about this a little bit later. But what we've done is work with Bianca and the team at Cuscal to identify where there are some opportunities for us to work together in this particular space. We do think that there's real value in those crypto-related reward cards. We think there's real value in providing a curated list of coins that your customers can buy, sell, and hold. It's not going to be for everybody, but you'd be surprised, because everybody assumes it's for your under 35-year-old, but my father-in-law, he's a grumpy old thing, but he's well into his 70s. And when I saw him last, the first thing he said to me is, should I be buying Bitcoin? Now, when people late into their 70s are asking you whether they should be buying Bitcoin, this is a man that's not particularly financially successful, but this is a man who is really keen to identify ways that he can diversify the small portfolio that he's got. So I think that that's a real kind of siren call to everybody else here, not to just dismiss it. It is a new investment class. It might be going through a tough period at this moment in time, but the indications are that it's here to stay. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Steve.
Thanks, everybody. I will have a very different approach to the one that Anthony had. I speak quickly. I'm going to shoehorn probably a 2-hour presentation into 25 minutes with about 75 slides. I have had the benefit of well north of 5,000 conversations in the last 2 years in this role. I've spoken to you all. There is a version of you I've spoken to. I've spoken to the lawyers, the accountants, I've spoken to the government representatives, the bankers, the financial service businesses, the people in supply chains, in startups, state government, federal government, internationally. I've spoken to you all. And the main reason to do that is because people fail to grasp the context of other people when considering this technology. I put on an event a few months back, Blockchain Week it was called. It was the mainstream moment. I called it the mainstream moment because on day one, we met at the ASX and I had represented over the course of the week $250, $350 billion worth of economic value. We also had politicians, Anthony, we had all sorts of people from traditional financial service businesses, all the people that you know and see. They were day one. On day two, I brought the builders in, much less interesting than day one. On day three, I brought in the startups and the NFT people. On day four, I brought the regulators. And then I brought in another group on day five, which was people in Australia who are making an impact on this space. It's not the same room. These are all very different conversations. I'll start with some of the key elements here that you'll often hear about. And one of the things that I liked about presenting today is people don't ask follow-on questions. I like the fact that this said we're going to be curious, because people have a view about this space. Invariably, you all have a view. It's the greatest scam known to man. It's either the greatest thing since sliced bread. You have a view. It's rare that I speak to people that haven't formed a view in relation to it. These words are overused. Let me tell you what you need to know about decentralised and distributed. It's not a monolithic concept for people. It can be as decentralised and as distributed as you need for your businesses. It doesn't have to be the Bitcoin version. It can be the distributed ledger version that says we trust 4 businesses. So that's how distributed and decentralised we want to be. Immutable, another catchphrase that people use. They say you can't change it. Once it's done, it's done. Unless it doesn't suit my business. In which case, let's change it. They're the questions you need to ask yourself. How immutable? How decentralised? How distributed? This one is the one where people get caught up. Private, pseudonymous, anonymous. Your businesses do not want anonymity. Government does not want anonymity. You will live in private or pseudonymous realms. And you can do that because all of these things are architected decisions that your businesses will need to make. No one is selling you Bitcoin as a solution if it doesn't fit your business. They're saying, what does your business need? And where do you want to compromise on some of these principles? The narratives then play out related to that subject matter. It's a roller coaster, it has been. The headlines will point to that. Here's what we've heard so many times. Bitcoin's dead. It was dead at $100, it was dead at $1,000, dead at $10,000, dead at $70, now it's $23. I still can't afford a Bitcoin most of the time. I don't know who else can. It's still $23,000. These things have gone up and they've gone down. ICOs, you might remember the acronym. This is where most people in Australian government in particular formed their view. 2017-ish, they said ICOs sound like a scam. We don't like it. We're not touching this space. That's what happened. And people did this as well. They said, listen, I like the blockchain. I don't like crypto. I had an Uber driver last week that said that exact same thing to me. You don't have to pick a side in relation to this subject matter. The question is, what does any one of these terms mean for you? And this is the one. Blockchain, not Bitcoin. That's it. It's in all the rooms. Smart contracts. Anyone that's heard the phrase smart contracts, I like those smart contracts, but I don't like those other elements. It's just the language that people have bought into. Our peak industry body, government body that speaks of technology, the DTA put something up on their website, I think it's in 2018. It says, blockchain's not ready. Here's what's happened since then. They haven't updated it. It links through to an article from, I think, 2018. Nothing says the Australian government is across the detail here like an article that hasn't been updated for 4 years to tell you that our technology is not ready. Ask the question, is it better? Does it suit what we need to do? That's what we have inherited. The dark web is one of my favourite subject matters, and scams are my favourite subject matters. As the industry spokesman, I've said this consistently. When you hear the word scam, ask the following question. Is it a romance scam? Is it an identity scam? Is it an email phishing scam? What kind of scam are we talking about when we say scams? When people don't make money in crypto, the first thing they say is, I got scammed. I bought it, it went down. It's a scam. So the question about scams is, what kind of scam are you buying into? This is the only slide I have with some details. The one on the right-hand side here, 0.15%. Data is a really tricky thing because when you can rely on it and it runs counter to narratives, it really pisses people off. 0.15 of 1% are the bad actors on these chains. This is Chainalysis' data, who sell to government and to law enforcement. They're telling people that less than 0.2 of 1% are the nefarious bad actors on this space. It runs counter to the narratives. So ask the question, what is the scam? Who are these bad actors that are scaring us away from these things? Let's frame the story then for your respective businesses. I am the boring face of cryptocurrency and blockchain in this country. I have been for a couple of years. I live in rooms where I talk about things that relate to regulation, process improvement. That's me. In most rooms, it is an evolution. It's business as usual, but better. Nothing gets C-suites more excited than me saying it'll make your margin a little bit better. That's something people can digest. If I say I'm going to disrupt your business, they go, no one's disrupting our business. But if I say I can improve your margin, or your margins are degrading and this technology might help, it piques people's interest. This is what it means for most people. Digital twins. Your businesses are digitising. No one gets scared when they say, listen, we've put this on the internet. That's what's happening in most of these rooms. We are digitising our information. What flows next is a beneficiary of the kind of technology we're talking about. The tech stack, in 2016, when I was looking at this space, I talk tech all the time. And since 2017, I've described the creeping fog of regulation as the main conversation starter. And the reality is tech barely gets a mention. Ironically, I went to the United States, I spoke to the Federal Reserve, had 14 of them that showed up for this meeting, and they talked about tech. And in Australia, we don't talk tech. We just say, what could go wrong? Let's make sure we don't do it. So I had to leave the country to see those who are printing money for the world say, we want to know how this technology will impact us. Here's the macro view and some points again for you to ask yourself about, and whether or not you think these are trends that this business is this space is moving towards. Value creation will be disintermediated at scale. All I'm saying is people have the means of production now. You can mint an NFT. You can create a digital representation of yourself, of your identity. You can own these things. You can do it very cheaply, if not at zero cost. You don't have to go to someone and say, can you prove that this artwork is mine? No, I can prove it myself. We are handing to people the tools in what is the greatest experiment in open source software we've ever seen. You can do it yourself. You can do it yourself. Everything will be fractionalised. So here's the question. Why wouldn't we have smaller things? Historically, we haven't done it because it's too expensive. We can't fractionalise these things. We can't move small amounts. We can't do micropayments. It costs too much to move the micropayment, so we don't do it. Well, this technology allows you to fractionalise, so why wouldn't you do that? Everything will be tokenised. Well, a natural consequence of something that is fractionalised is it likely to go up? Is it possible that it will go up in value? In which case, why wouldn't you tokenise it? Why wouldn't you attach a value to it, track that value, trade that value? And this is what you're left with. And this is why in the banking space and in the payment space and the government realm, this matters. This is deep liquidity in assets that have otherwise been static and stale. There is a velocity here that makes everyone's hair stand on end, 24/7, 365. No one waits on Friday for the market to close and waits for it to open on Monday. You will trade in real time, you can sell in real time, you can move assets in real time. This is the secret source of this technology. And all the stuff that I'll touch on soon, which speaks to regulation, the reason why regulation is moving so quickly now is not because this technology doesn't work. Let's bust the myth. People are saying we're going to ban it. It's not being banned. They're just trying to control its spread. This is technology that works so well that there is now global coordination, which I'll point to, that indicates what this stuff is. So I also had an elephant, Anthony. I made sure it's all about elephants. Here is the boring stuff that should hopefully bring the conversations close to the businesses that you are aware of and running. The travel rule, for those that don't know, the Financial Action Task Force has a very simple rule that it's rolling out across all digital exchanges globally. It says, tell us who is on either side of this transaction. That's it. They are wiping out any anonymity with respect to the exchange side. What they're saying is, who are they? Identify them. Have they been KYC'd? Is AML stuff here a risk? What would you all be scared of if I told you can identify every person on a transaction? This is being rolled out globally as we speak. It's been in train for years. It is now being rolled out. The European model of this says as low as the smallest transaction you can move. It's not a threshold of $10,000 transactions or $3,000 transactions. Legislation that's proposed out of the EU says any value transaction will need you to unbundle who's on either end. So what will you think about this technology if you can identify who it is that's on either end of that? Stablecoins, as Anthony mentioned, this is the most pervasive subject matter. The Luna collapse and stablecoins in general, in many respects triggered by when Mark Zuckerberg said to us all in 2019, by the way, Zuckbucks are a thing. We've decided what the basket of currency is going to be. We've got our own dollars now. Is everyone okay with that? And within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it was put in front of Congress. And businesses were told, do not support this. And it's on the record. They said, we will put pressure on your businesses. UX works for Facebook. Facebook knew that if they got the UX right, then you're just going to press that button and transfer money around the world in an instant, and you won't care. The user experience, and this is the digital marketer in me, people just want the button to press. That's what they want. So when he said, we've got money, you won't notice, and it's basically free, said, bring it on. And it was stopped. Unhosted wallets is where we're going. Unhosted wallets, in many respects, is the last bastion here. Should you have a digital representation of your value, I'd say to you all, now take your wallets out of your pockets, now show me what's in your wallet. You'd say, well, why would I do that? Unhosted wallets are a question we need to ask ourselves about. Do you want every last cent, every last transaction to be recognised, or do you want the capacity to hold on to that little bit of you without government interference? It's a question that we need to ask, and if we don't ask, it'll be answered for us. Unhosted wallets will be drawn into this system. Decentralised finance, DeFi, DAOs, these acronyms, these buzzwords. Here's the thing that's important to know about decentralised finance. In the kinds of examples that Anthony gave before, when businesses like Celsius have failed and some of these VC funds have failed, it wasn't DeFi that failed. It was centralised finance that failed. People lent money to each other and no one knew who the hell it was until it went pear-shaped. The DeFi world is transparent. It's a fact. You read about it now with Celsius. Celsius made some repayments before they declared bankruptcy. You know who they gave their money back to? decentralized protocols because they had to. Because the code said, if you don't give us our money back, we liquidate your position. So before they announced that they were in bankruptcy Chapter 11 filing zone, they gave the money back to the businesses they didn't have an option but to give the money back to. That runs counter to narratives. All these things are payments. This is the thing, the use case, the killer use case, it's payments. It's onboarding people into payments. It's holding something as a store of value. It's transacting for people. It's identifying who they are. It's putting it in wallets. It's payments. You're in the right room. It's payments. It just hasn't dawned on people because they're too busy noticing the speculative excess that says, has it gone up? Who cares? This is digital infrastructure. That's what this conversation is. That's why I am the boring face. It's digital infrastructure. What you decide has digital value is entirely up to you. You know, when I talk to a 20-something-year-old and I say to them, what's important to you, they'll take it their phone. Their entire digital representation, their life is their phone. I take people back and say, here's a painting I've had for 15 years on the wall. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's your own representation, your own digitised sense of purpose or value. But they're payments, they're transmissions. So what in the world is happening? So this is where it gets really boring on the regulatory side. You go, this can't possibly be a thing. Can't possibly be a thing. It's a thing. Singapore opened the door to everybody. Singapore has closed the door slightly. They're making it really hard, but they're still saying we're open for business. You will be regulated. You will be identified. You can't advertise in Singapore now if you're running these exchanges, but there's a market. In Hong Kong, even stricter, sophisticated investors only. But they are leading these conversations, as in the APAC region is aggressively doing it. Australia has the benefit of digging stuff out of the ground. We have historically. They need to win when it comes to financial services. They need inbound capital inflows more than we do in order to survive. It's happening. You go, well, that's APAC, the rest doesn't matter. Funny thing happened in the UK recently when they handed off the EU participation. They realised that they couldn't just stand around. So instead, they're now positioning themselves as the centre of this space. They're in a natural and advantageous position. London has been the centre. The government has come out recently and said this is something we're going to commit to, and they've gone to stablecoins as an obvious example. They're moving very quickly to distinguish themselves from the EU, who, by the way, are creating the most complicated set of regulatory frameworks you will ever come across. Rolling out now, as in market, sort of described here, for a regulatory regime they expect will snap together in 2024. With some outlying things. If you are already regulated by financial services, then you're already regulated by financial services. This speaks to a number of the topics, and if it's outside of this, they're coming for that as well. So the positions are in play. They're in play at the moment. What about the USA? USA is the USA. I've said to people consistently that America doesn't need to get a lot right in order to win here. Money will just flow to the United States. So it is fanciful to think here in Australia, we're just going to wait till everyone figures it out, including the US, and then we'll have our turn. No one will care, and this is not me ringing the alarm, but they just won't care because they don't do it now. So why would they do it if something like this plays out? Two approaches that have been taken at the moment from the United States. One is they've said, let's talk about it. Let's encourage our own financial institutions. Let's talk about stable coins. Let's see how we will regulate these businesses. Let's give consideration to things like ESG and how things like Bitcoin will impact it. They're doing that. So they're doing that side of it. Let's talk about it. They're doing it visibly. They are saying to the world, we're still here. We know we're fractured and fragmented, but we're giving it consideration. This, at the moment, came out a few days ago. Coinbase have said we found some people who are front-running some listings. That's not the story here. If you look behind the story, what you'll find is the SEC, who has commenced these proceedings, have just quietly said, by the way, there are a bunch of products that we think are financial service products. They're financial products, and have made that part of this case. They're not fighting the people who they've listed because they're just saying, by the way, we just think that in getting some insider trading type tips, they've used financial products, and for that reason, the penalties are likely to be more extreme. So they're, by stealth, regulating through enforcement, which is what we ask government not to do. It says, let's chat about what these products are. Instead, they're going after people and they're trying to reframe the regulatory perimeter. But the US is coming for all of these things. If you look at what's happening in jurisdictions like Wyoming, they are giving banking licenses. You know, they're encouraging businesses and investment. When China said for the, let's say, 15th time, Bitcoin is banned, people literally switched off the machines. Many of them went to the US. The US is now responsible for the greatest amount of hash rate in Bitcoin. And they said, by the way, it's greener energy because we know you can't switch these things on in the US unless they're greener. That's how fluid this was. Literally turned off the machines and the machines were redeployed, or someone bought something else and turned it on the other side of the world. That is something which is lost on many conversations that I have in Australia. No one cares about the squiggly line that distinguishes us. No one says to me when I'm overseas, what's the project and which state in Victoria or New South Wales or Queensland you're from. No one cares. We kid ourselves that they care. No one cares. These are borderless opportunities, which is what makes them very exciting. And I think it was touched on today. When you look at what China's doing, it is an extraordinary experiment. You look at that number at the top, 4.5 million, I should say, merchants. And they're testing. That's where we're at with the Chinese experiment. They're not worrying quite so much about what does this mean for us when it comes to privacy and what are the dollar values. They're just trying to build a better mousetrap. They make their businesses, they make their country more efficient. If you take a dollar, you think about what the US did when it printed money, they sent out checks, literally sent out checks. The Chinese government's now saying, what if you don't send out a check? We know where every dollar goes. You make your own economy more efficient. That's what's happening in China at the moment. When Australia, and that's not a typo, for those that don't know the space, we like to say when without an H in it. So when Australia is the lingo here. And you come back to the question, which is this happening here? Surely not. 2019, the federal government, through the Department of Industry, created a national blockchain roadmap. Fair to say it wasn't a lot on the road, not a lot of amenities, just was pretty much something that drawn there with a few little bits on the side there to say it's a roadmap. It was incredibly important for us because what it said was there is a home for this subject matter within the Australian government. It was inoffensive. Department of Industry didn't bother anybody. And the subject matter that they reeled out first instance were supply chain credentials. They did RegTech and ultimately did cybersecurity. No one talked about financial services because as soon as you say financial services, everybody absolutely panics. So that's where they started the conversation. That conversation was carried forward into the Senate when we had a particular committee that looked at this subject matter not at all in their first iteration, a little bit in their second iteration, and in their third iteration it dominated their conversation. They said, what is this? And can we play a part? That happened over a 15-month period. Not relevant at all to dominating the entirety of the scope of the third part. And here are things which will look familiar to you largely. Licensing, custody, banking and debanking, taxation, there's a few others in there, but that's what they asked questions about. This is subject matter that is relevant. I'll come to the next one. Treasury Payments Review. Whilst everyone's been over talking to Scott Farrell, looking at the payments review and everything that's happened, and thought we don't have to worry about digital assets, if you read Scott's very impressive review, you probably didn't get to the last paragraph, the last chapter, I should say. Most people read the beginning, it was long. If you got to the last chapter, surprise, surprise, Scott says, by the way, you can review the entire system, but these things, which he didn't offer comment about, save to make people aware of them, will impact entirely how you decide to reframe Australia's payments infrastructure. The same boring conversations I keep saying to you, we keep having, it's still the same issues. They're saying this changes payments. This changes payments infrastructure. It's absolutely the case that it's relevant to you. Within Treasury, I've had a lot of dealings with Treasury in the last year and a half. Treasury has grown their team from, I think, 3 or 4 to 20 in this space. That team is dealing with both payments and digital assets. Same team. If you're talking about payments, no one's got any issues. You're talking about digital assets, you probably won't get as much visibility. Same team, because these are intersecting subject matters, because they are influencing what payments infrastructure will look like. My favourite buzzword bingo that is acronyms. I'm dealing with all of them at this point in time. And the question is, well, that's good news for us. Government's talking to each other. We all know government doesn't talk to each other. Every one of these departments is doing their own thing, largely. They do intersect, but they're all feeling their way through. Their domain experience is thin, because domain experience with respect to this space is thin in every room I've been in for the last 5 years, and it continues to be. They're trying to determine what kind of teams they need. They're trying to resource those teams. Those teams are incredibly difficult to resource. ASIC has been at the forefront. They're the cop that's meant to make sure nothing goes wrong. The reality is they're being super conservative about this space, as they should be, because that's what their job is, clean up messes. The ACCC has largely maintained a conversation around the narratives that are scams or otherwise, so they've recently released a scam report. And again, I rang them up, we had the conversation, we said, we're on the same page, let's talk about scams that aren't the industry, that are hurting the people who are trying to build our businesses. But that's what the ACCC is doing, and you'll see them more readily engage in this subject matter. Austrac have been in the picture for me in the last couple of years. As I mentioned, FATF and the travel rule, payments, KYC, AML issues, all these things are perpetually on their remit, and they're responsible for it. So they are hyper engaged. I met with most of their management team a week and a half ago to sort of connect the dots on some of these conversations as I see them from an industry perspective. Well, let me go back to that one. APRA has just released a roadmap. Again, for them, they're feeling the way through. The truth is, you'd be shocked, the banks really don't want to talk about this subject matter behind closed doors at all, let alone in front of sort of open doors. So from my perspective now, it's trying to sort of entice them into these conversations, which more visibly you would have seen Commonwealth Bank and a few others doing things. That's happening slowly, but the reality for APRA is APRA has to move slowly. The RBA, I met with the head of payments for the RBA last week. You sort of go, well, it's not a thing that we're going to be worried about. We are. Wholesale, central bank digital currencies, retail, central bank digital currencies, stable coins, all on the agenda for the RBA. So leaves me with Treasury. Treasury just concluded part one of a consultation. The ex-lawyer in me has never been so busy. When we're talking about this subject matter, the consultation involves what are these things? Are they financial products? How should we regulate them? Do we require them to be treated as financial products? Are they part of a markets licence regime? Should they be part of an AFSL regime? Should it be outside of the AFSL regime? Do we trust this industry to do it itself? Here's what I said to them. No one trusts the industry to do it itself. Perception or otherwise, let's just knock it out. Let's not start at the lazy end either, which says they're all financial products, just regulate them that way, because they're not. So I've actually said to government, in a more convoluted way, let's just do the work that lives in the middle of these things. Let's try to figure out what they are. Let's figure out what our respective roles are and how we move forward with this subject matter. The wild cards, and these are some of the things that I see by virtue of this sort of more global lens here, the fact that I don't stare at my navel, the reality is much more interest is happening and many more interesting things are happening outside of Australia. So venture capital has moved. The reality here is when I spoke to VC firms a year or two back, they really didn't want to talk about this at all. When I did Blockchain Week a few months back, I think I asked 15 VC firms and 14 agreed to participate. Everyone's about Web3. Everyone's about the metaverse. Everyone's about the next investment they want to move into. So venture has moved. Australian venture firms are on the hop because what else is happening is from an inbound perspective, words I didn't think I would hear, which I've heard a lot in recent time, Australia is strategically important. That says economic opportunity. We are being viewed as an economic opportunity, which then says, what are we going to do about it if someone is looking over our fence and says, we think we can do a better job, we think we can take share. And the reality of my advice to government is we don't have to do anything, but we shouldn't complain in 3 years' time when there's not much of a pie to carve up, because the truth is people see opportunity because they're not worried about the border. And they know we are a stable place to do business. The protocol layer is an important conversation here. Protocol layer, when you hear it, think settlement layer. When you're talking about Bitcoin and Ethereum and some of the alternatives that are out there, this is a settlement layer. This is why payments matter. This is where payments settle. That's the race at the moment. Who wants to be the base layer, right? That's a really active conversation and different answers about who that might be, but that's what a lot of this conversation relates to. You'll hear layer one is a conversation. Another buzzword is layer two. Layer two is the scaling layer. It's funny when, again, the stereotype here said this tech doesn't scale, you can't do it, it's useless, it's too expensive. It's not. You're thinking Bitcoin, slow rate, slow number of transactions that are going to get through. Layer two scales, and layer two settles on layer one. So these things are being built out in real time, which is why the 2018 version of the DTA is a bit silly. The application layer is yet to really be built out. What can you build if I told you, and I come back to something like micropayments, what can you build if I tell you now finally the tech's fast enough, the tech's cheap enough? Now you'll build the app. The notion of what's the killer app? What's the killer app? If this is a thing, what's the killer app? The killer app has been, people have been building infrastructure, and the infrastructure is built out in a way that you can now build things on top of it. The application layer is coming. The trends, brands matter more than ever before. This is the crazy bit for me that people don't recognise. If you have a trusted brand, you have the absolute advantage available to you today, and you will lose it if you do nothing. If people trust your brand, they will happily move towards a conversation that you have around this subject matter. Don't squander brand equity at the moment. That's something which is just lost on people. With marketing departments, and I get what the C-suite looks like, they're all panicky. But if you've got a brand that people trust, have a conversation. Macquarie Bank spoke a little bit recently about some interest they were having in mining. They said mining is the thing we're talking about, didn't talk about anything else. But they're in. They land sort of brand equity into this, and it's a small division that's just testing. But it is a big brand that's smart enough to say, listen, we're talking about this thing. Is there anything else we should know? The digital twins are, again, the natural evolution for most businesses. It doesn't scare anyone if I talk about digital twins. I spoke, I think it was to one of the state governments about the land titles. You often hear about land titles and digital twins. And I said, what's the program look like? I said, it'll be done in 15 years. So the reality is, this is where people are comfortable. They're just too slow. Direct-to-consumer models. I say that in the sense that direct-to-business model, direct-to-consumer, this technology allows you to bypass things. When we talk about moving out of the way these intermediaries, many of us are intermediaries. This is the catch. People look at it and go, not me, not my backyard. This is a mechanism that bypasses a lot of these things. The reason why they're so efficient is they just don't need as many people who are trusted parties in between. The fact that I can send, in theory, $10 to the other side of the world, it'll settle within a few minutes, it'll be there irrevocably, and it'll cost me a few cents. Who competes with that? So, this infrastructure is now something that people are looking at. De-risk data. We're all scared about these honeypots. We keep accumulating information. The reality here is no one needs all that information most of the time. We barely use it. You opt people in, and there's terms and conditions, and you do these things, and is it current, and where do we store it? Is it going to be hacked? You go, what do we actually need? You go, just needed to know who they were. And that was it once we knew. But you accumulate this information. A lot of this technology allows you not to have to accumulate that information. You can verifiably prove they are a human with a life. Job done. We can test it as we see. You don't need to accumulate this information that you never use. Recurring revenue streams relate to things like smart contracts. We talked about NFTs before when Anthony was talking about it. The question there is when people say, what do I care? It's stupid, it's a JPEG. People are flipping JPEGs. It's not stupid for the person that creates it. They can sell it once, they can see recurring revenue, they can limit the rights, they can potentially retract certain things. It's the rights that attach to it that's the valuable bit. In the meantime, you're going to go, I actually like apes, so I'm going to invest in them. You can do that too. But how many stupid things have we all bought? How many trading cards, how many shoes that we liked, how many T-shirts we liked? That's what people are doing. They're doing these things. Now, there is a frenzy. There is also a settling period that's on the way. Back to this bit, which is where I started. We talked about immutable, decentralised, distributed. Here's the opposite. Permission, private and revocable. Your business today. You don't let everyone in. You decide what the rules are. And if you don't like it, out. You can still do that. This technology doesn't force you to accept something you don't like. You go, what version of this are you happy with? Picks and shovels, ton of money to be made from telling people how to do things. Rent seekers. You look at something like OpenSea. That is a marketplace for NFTs. It's a marketplace for NFTs. It's not rocket science here. So you look at something like Amazon and eBay and you go, look at these businesses. Rent seekers and intermediaries are emerging in all these markets. If you are unfamiliar, the first thing you do is, who do I trust to do this thing for me? That's what this space is filled with at the moment. This is the Web 2.5 version of what's coming in Web 3. It's a natural evolution of this space. This was yesterday. These are yesterday's figures. So, the demise of this space. As of yesterday, AUD, Bitcoin's still worth $600 billion. The market cap's still $1 trillion. You go, oh, this terrible calamity. It's all gone to shit. It'll never come back again. Still 1.4 trillion. People are still invested in this space. Again, whether you think it's valuable or not, and whether it's a shit coin or a good coin, there's still an investment pool in there that's not insignificant. And that's after this terrible demise that you would have clicked on many, many times in the last month or two. So what's next as I finish up? Roller coaster will continue. This is another word that you might not be familiar with. You'll get wrecked. People who speculate will get wrecked. Time horizons, mine is boring. Mid, long. If you speculate in the short term, you're likely to suffer. Scarcity is something which is now settling in this space. Genuine scarcity. Scarcity of good business execution. Scarcity of product that is real. Scarcity of talent. Scarcity is coming. We're in that sort of stage. Governance is something that you need to be aware of when you talk to people who are in their 20s and they're looking at this space. There is an ability to be involved. There's an incentive in these ecosystems for people who are in their 20s or 30s or open-minded. And that incentive is, do I want to do purposeful work? Am I willing to invest my money in this? Am I willing to invest my time? Does this align with my values? Exactly the thing you see in the rest of the businesses. You go, these businesses are being built ground up with this kind of consideration. Baked into the protocols, baked into the businesses. What does it mean to be part of this business? And by the way, can I distribute, or do I have to lock someone up that is work for 3 years, and if you meet these cliff sort of moments, we'll make sure we compensate you, versus let's get this right, and 3 months from now. You go, that incentive is very difficult to compete against. It's the reason why when I was in New York for NFT.NYC, The market did not impact the enthusiasm in the room. People believe in what Web3 is. They believe in this technology because they're digital natives. And the truth is, you've got to come around to that view if you're not born with it. And collateralization, one of the penny drop moments for most people is if you don't have to sell the asset, if you can use it for something else, if it can facilitate these transactions, if you can borrow against it, it feels like all the other assets you have. This has now arrived too. The reality of getting a loan in the DeFi space is, have you got collateral? If you've got collateral, get a loan. You go to a bank and say, I've got collateral. They go, yeah, but your income's a bit patchy. They won't give you the money. You'll get it in these markets. These markets will judge you on collateral. They'll judge you on criteria, which is more, in many respects, something that you can just prove by virtue of the fact you've got a history that says, I can repay you the loan. And that's the criteria. So the collateralization is something that's sorely misunderstood. And that is the end block. 74 slides, 5 years, and about 5,000 conversations. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thanks very much, Steve. And I do know what you're all thinking now, and it's probably not the speed record sort of that has just been set around how many slides and words can flash up in, 30 minutes. I'm pretty sure what you're all thinking is Bianca is standing in the way between me and that glowing blue arch over there that James has very clearly pointed out is the passage to dinner. But bear with me because what I wanted to talk to you about, having heard not just from our two very capable and experienced speakers around digital currency just now, but also all of the presenters that you've heard up until then today, is that digital currency is real, it's here, Australian consumers are adopters, and they are using digital currencies in many different forms, particularly crypto. And so what I wanted to talk to you about today is the so what. So what does this mean for your businesses? And Cuscal has been doing a lot of work, and actually we've been doing that work in the crypto summer, quite literally in the summer. And so I wanted to, in coming up with the sharing for today, have a look at, are we in the winter, are we in the pause zone, where are we with digital currency? So I thought I'd have a look at some of the news headlines globally. And these are from the last 10 days. I think it's fair to say it's fairly schizophrenic. I'm not sure if it's summer, winter, spring or autumn. Here they are. Crypto trading volumes tumbled to 2-year low. Meet the ASX chief executive who receives 5% of her salary in Bitcoin. Tesla's Bitcoin dump leaves accountants puzzled. Total number of crypto users likely to reach 1 billion by 2030. Despite a market crash, these Australians buy their lunch with Bitcoin. Bitcoin buyers outrank sellers despite brutal market crash. So having read that, I still wasn't clear, are we in winter or summer, but the relevance of crypto, particularly for Australian consumers, is relevant. So as I said, the starting point is thinking about how digital currency is going to impact your businesses and also what your customers are thinking about digital currency and what you can be doing to enable either your customers or your businesses utilising this advancement that's happening. And this is what we've been doing at Cuscal. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that we think you should be thinking about depending on the type of business that you're operating in. The first piece is around a digital currency card. So as the investors in these assets hold them in their various exchange wallets or digital currency wallets, what they need is access to that asset through the traditional payment rails. And so this can be through a Visa card, as Anthony's mentioned. So as an issuer of many forms of cards, prepaid, debit, credit card, Cuscal can issue these cards on behalf of any organisation who's looking to enable Australian consumers to effectively get their assets converted into fiat, Australian dollars, or any currency, in fact, and then be able to transact, buy their lunch, buy a car, buy their groceries using the asset, the digital currency asset. This can also then translate into any other card-related services, whether it be switching, settlement, rewards. We've already talked about that. So this is something that you can consider as part of your business, whether you be a financial services issuing company, or an acquiring company, or an exchange. Crypto ATMs. So in the same way that these assets need to be able to be converted into a fiat currency, these crypto ATMs are already popping up all around the world. In Australia, there's about 70 of these ATMs globally. And really the purpose of the ATM is for people to convert their crypto into AUD, or alternatively to buy crypto through this ATM in the same way you can deposit cash into an ATM. Exchange intermediary. So I guess what the use cases here are is that you need to be able to fund your exchange intermediary account with fiat dollars. You probably want to do that as quickly as possible, and your customers probably want to be able to pull the money out and convert it, as I've just mentioned earlier, as soon as possible. So real-time payments in Australia can enable that transaction. So the funding and defunding of an exchange wallet is something that certainly we're considering being enabling for our clients. In addition to that, you will have seen, and we've already touched on this a little bit, CBA's announcement and the announcement that they are enabling their customers to access a digital currency wallet effectively via the CommBank customer mobile banking app, and that has now been paused. But enabling a white label solution such as that for our clients is something that we're exploring, and we've already commenced discussions with third parties to enable that. And then the last piece is around central bank digital currency. And we've talked a little bit about this today, but I think it's fair to say that most jurisdictions around the world are either already issuing, and we've talked a lot about China, but already issuing a central bank digital currency, or are piloting some form of a central bank digital currency. In Australia, we've already commenced discussions with RBA around the pilots that they are considering moving forward. They've already undertaken a number of pilots, particularly experimenting with the technology that could enable a digital currency. But the next thing is looking at a use case. And I think the concern, maybe historically, maybe less so right now, based on what Steve's just mentioned to us, is that given that we do have quite a sophisticated traditional payment option in Australia with real-time payments and card payments, there is a lot of ubiquity in payments in Australia, and also a lot of options. From a retail perspective, it's hard to see what the obvious use case would be for the Reserve Bank to issue a retail consumer-based digital currency. I think that a global kind of transaction might be something that would be considered, but there's no real urgency for that for the Reserve Bank in the current state. What would be of interest, however, and from our understanding, the Reserve Bank are looking at piloting with more urgency, is around a wholesale proposition, and we've put ourselves forward to be part of the next pilot for this, if that is to proceed. And with the change of government, there's no actual dates as yet put in place, but we certainly look forward to being part of that, which would also enable Cuscal to be part of the discussion and test the technology, underlying technology. So I'm now going to invite my fellow panellists to come up on stage. James is going to run through some cute questions that he has, and also give opportunity for everyone to ask any questions of the panel.
Yeah, so this will just go about an hour. And if there's no questions, we can just sit in silence. No, it'll go for 11 minutes max. We'll finish at exactly 4:30. Put your hand up if you want a question. Are those roving mics about? There's one in the back corner. Maybe come down the front so they can see you. Even you can see them. Can I kick it off Do you see, I don't know who it's for, could be for all of you, do you see the day when crypto becomes a stable asset that superannuation companies will want to invest in, that it's safe enough for them? Come on, let me know. Not any of you are.
I'm happy to say that the reality there is you look at what their investment mandates are, and the reality for them at the moment is, when I speak to all traditional sort of financial service businesses, is that they need greater clarity with respect to regulation. They want to know what they're buying and what protections are in place. And they've said that's the key bit. You go one step back from that, family offices, high net worths, they're investing. So ultimately you sort of say this is the consumer-facing version, and this is where the retail investor has most of their savings. If you look at where high net worths are moving, they're dipping their toe in to this subject matter now. And they're starting with where you would expect very small allocations, 1%. No one's saying shift into the subject matter. They go, buy 1%, use it as part of a balanced and diversified portfolio. But regulation is a critical sort of blocker for that at the moment. They can't invest in this subject matter given their current mandates.
Is it kind of analogous almost to there was all the shifting rules and regulations and policies about green technology and climate change and whatever, and all business was going with just tell us what the rules are and don't change them. So is that kind of the key thing?
You multiply that 10x. I mean, the challenge here is what I touched upon, this international sort of thing that's happening here. People don't want to say no for fear of missing out on what the economic opportunity is. So there's this natural tension that says you don't want to regulate it out of existence, and you probably can't. You don't want to be the business or the country that greenlights everything. So that tension means we're all asking, industry participants globally are saying, can we have a little more certainty? No one's saying it needs to be certain, but they're saying we need to know whether or not this is something that we can safely invest in without having the ire of regulators sort of cast upon us.
Anthony or Bianca?
I think that there's a lot of regulation that needs to be put in place in this space, and I think that all financial services have a lot of regulation and stipulation and risk put on them, risk management protocols put on them. I think that superannuation firms having the green light to invest in crypto is probably not necessarily an urgent regulatory requirement. So I see that coming for sure. You see large organisations who aren't regulated already investing this as part of a balanced portfolio, but superannuation regulation, opening this up as an asset class, is probably not high on the priority list for the Reserve Bank or any other regulator to make.
Yeah, anything to add?
I would just say the consumer always wins in these things. So if consumers want it, eventually it will happen. There are exchange-traded funds that are already providing crypto-related assets or crypto-related companies. You can do it by proxy through Michael Saylor's company in the United States, or MicroStrategy. So there are already ways in which you can either have a self-managed super fund that invests in crypto. ETFs outside of the US already exist, so Canada. There's the better funds here in Australia that offer a one that's linked to companies that invest in crypto, so crypto mining companies. So by proxy, people are already doing it.
Yeah, right. Anyone? Good, because I have a follow-on question. You said the consumer always wins, but some of you spoke about consumer kind of ignorance about all this stuff, scams, even fraud, people not knowing. Should the government be doing more to educate people? I mean, there's huge awareness, isn't there, for example, of credit card fraud. We all know about that now a little bit better, and email scams and whatever. Whose job is it? Is it just the market's job to educate us about the dangers? Whose job is it?
I have an answer in relation to that as well, unsurprisingly. When it comes to this subject matter, government has to lead the conversation. We've said the language that government uses is as confusing as the language industry is using. So you look to resources, and the challenge for government at the moment is, in order to simplify things so people grasp it, they're actually muddying the waters. And there was an example recently where they put out some pronouncements by one of the regulators that said crypto-related products. Now, does anyone in this room know what crypto-related is? It is not the second cousin of crypto. They meant derivatives.
Right.
But they didn't say derivatives because they wanted people to know they're talking about crypto-related derivatives, but they didn't use the word derivative. So I said to them, there's a challenge there because everyone just saw the word crypto and they conflate all of these conversations. So it has to be led by government, and industry has to do its bit to support it. CoinSpot are a good example of it. They're on the front foot talking about this subject matter. We, as an industry, when people talk about the wild west of this thing, I've been on record for 2 years saying, can we please talk about regulation and what scams look like? So government has lagged, but the truth is they've accelerated now given the implications for retail investors.
Bianca?
Yeah, I think that definitely the regulators and the government have to be playing more of a front and centre role than they currently are. I do think, however, that if you do have the direct customer relationship, it's imperative on you to utilise, the closeness that you've got with consumers and customers to be able to educate them. I also think that there's some regulatory change required in relation to the liability that comes out of these scams, because at the moment that liability is sitting very much with the financial institutions, regardless of what happens in the events leading up to the scam. So I think the government has a much stronger role to play than they have to date.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting point you made about the industry. I mean, banks, for example, have put a lot of resources into trying to educate their customers so they don't get ripped off. So maybe it is an industry thing. Anthony?
I would say that the exchanges and the brokerages that we work with in this space are all already adhering to the rules that are in place and the regulations that are there. So whether it comes to Know Your Customer regulation or AUSTRAC registration, they're already doing those good things. And obviously not every exchange is a good actor and is a good provider of these services, but the ones that we've interacted with are doing the right thing. Yes, it probably needs an additional layer of legislation, and it seems inevitable that is going to come in probably the short to medium term.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it, when the industry calls for more regulation, more legislation. Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty strong indicator that it's needed.
Oh, part of it, though, is this, again, is separating these conversations out. I get a text message every hour or two from someone claiming to be my bank, asking me to click on a link. I don't think that's a bank scam. I don't attribute that to the bank, right? But if I see a crypto thing, a crypto scam, and I've said to the ACCC to ASIC, how do you identify what kind of scam it is? They say, people self-report. And it's like, okay, so if I get something that says crypto, I figure out it's a crypto scam, I will self-report as a crypto scam. Invariably, there are things like romance scams. Someone says they love me in Nigeria, and then as soon as I realise that I love them too, they say, can you send me some money? And I say, sure, that's a romance scam. Again, we've got to call things out for what they are. A lot of the industry hacks that you see, there's a massive one called the Ronin hack. Apparently, it was North Korean actors that did it. Now, that is something, again, that's a cyber issue. That is foreign actors that are trying to get... They're very different conversations between romance scams and cyber hacks, but we just don't have that level of sophistication in the conversation.
So just to be clear, when you get those emails when someone's saying they love you and then they ask you to send them money, that's a scam. Man, it's really disappointing. Yes, a question there. Can we get a microphone there? I thought I was really popular.
I've got a two-part question. Given the rise of stablecoins such as USDC, has the horse bolted for central banks to issue their own coin, given how long it may take for them to issue one? And the second part of the question is, which government have you seen out there which is the most proactive in terms of getting a coin out there outside of China and Nigeria?
Jump in. Won't be me answering
Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, certainly with regards to USDC, and talking about regulation, there is one area where I personally feel there needs to be an additional layer of scrutiny. USDC seems to be a really good actor in this space in that their treasury reserves are regularly audited, and you can see that it's mainly cash, not cash equivalents, that are on treasury, because cash equivalents is a little bit of a dark art. So I do think that that's an area where additional regulation will come in. Is it too late for banks? I don't think necessarily. I mean, if we think about the history of money full stop, it all started when banks issued their own funds, right? They issued their own currency, their own coins and notes. The Royal Bank of Scotland, or Bank of Scotland, sorry, still issues notes and coins today in parallel with the Bank of England's own coins. So you've got a private bank issuing currency, physical currency in notes and coins alongside the Bank of England. I can see that same model existing in stable coins. We saw JP Morgan already have their coin in the United States, which is USD backed. Again, I think there's an element of trust that consumers want, and banks are in a position of huge amount of trust. So there is an opportunity for them to issue a stable coin of the currency of the company, of the country in which they work in. So yeah, I think that hasn't gone completely.
36 seconds to go.
I was going to say, government make the rules too, by the way. So they've said if you are a private issued stablecoin, we're going to regulate you. But if governments are doing this, you just figure out what works and what doesn't work. So the reality is they're in a strong position to be able to slow, regulate, or otherwise ban these sorts of initiatives.
Thank you very much. That's all we got time for. Unless did you have a final comment there?
No,
You
that's all
look
good.
meaningfully at me. Please thank Bianca, Steve, and Anthony.